The ballroom fell silent when Admiral Marcus Keller stepped to the microphone, his chest heavy with ribbons that told stories most men couldn't imagine. The Navy SEAL reunion dinner at the San Diego harbor had drawn 300 warriors, men who'd earned their tridents in blood and sand. Keller's eyes swept the room, landing on a figure in the back corner who didn't quite fit. She sat alone, nursing a glass of water, her posture military straight despite the casual blazer that hid whatever shape lay beneath. Her hair was pulled back severely, and she hadn't touched the prime rib on her plate. Something about her triggered Keller's instinct, the same one that had kept him alive through Ramadi and Kandahar. She wore no insignia, carried no visible rank, yet several operators had nodded to her with unmistakable deference when they passed. Keller had built his reputation on reading rooms, on knowing who mattered before they opened their mouths. This woman was a ghost at a gathering of lions, and that bothered him more than he cared to admit. He'd asked his aide about her twice. Both times he'd received the same cryptic response: invited guest, clearance verified, no further information available. In 40 years of service, Keller had never encountered a wall that solid. The woman's eyes met his across the crowded room, and something passed between them, a recognition that transcended introduction. She knew he was curious. She knew he was coming, and the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth suggested she found his confusion amusing. Keller finished his remarks about brotherhood and sacrifice, received his standing ovation with practiced humility, and made his way through the crowd with singular purpose. He shook hands, accepted embraces, but never lost sight of that corner table. When he finally stood before her, she rose with fluid grace, extending a calloused hand that gripped his with surprising strength. Her eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes, and they held depths that made Keller recalibrate his assumptions. She was younger than he'd thought, maybe 35, but those eyes had seen things that aged the soul faster than the body. He decided to approach this the old-fashioned way, with the casual irreverence that defined SEAL culture. A test, really, to see how she'd respond to being challenged by someone who outranked everyone in the room. He smiled, gestured to the empty chairs, and spoke with the confidence of a man who'd never been denied an answer. "I'm doing something tonight I don't usually do," Keller said, his voice carrying that particular blend of authority and folksy charm that had served him through countless congressional hearings. "I'm asking every person here to share their call sign. Old tradition keeps the stories alive." He paused, let his smile widen. "I've heard some doozies tonight. Hammerhead because he broke 3 doors with his face in Mosul. Papercut because he almost bled out from a manila folder. Real dignified stuff." The woman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gray eyes. Amusement, maybe, or calculation. "So," Keller continued, settling into the chair across from her without waiting for invitation, "what do they call you?" She took a slow sip of water, set the glass down with deliberate care, and leaned back in her chair. The ballroom buzzed around them, but their corner had become an island of tension. "Shadow Ghost," she said simply, her voice lower than he'd expected, textured like smoke over gravel. Keller's smile froze. The noise of the room seemed to recede, replaced by a ringing in his ears that had nothing to do with tinnitus from too many firefights. He'd heard that call sign exactly once before, in a classified briefing so black it didn't officially exist. The operation had been redacted from every database, scrubbed from every server, buried so deep that even mentioning it could trigger investigations. But Keller remembered. He'd been the one who'd recommended the mission be stricken from the record, had personally overseen the destruction of every piece of evidence that it had ever occurred. The woman watched his face change, watched the color drain from his weathered cheeks, and her slight smile grew fractionally wider. "You've heard it," she observed. It wasn't a question. Keller's mind raced through protocols, clearances, compartmentalized information that suddenly felt inadequate. Shadow Ghost. The pilot who'd flown a mission so dangerous that 3 veteran Night Stalker pilots had refused it. The pilot who'd extracted a SEAL team from a mountainside in Pakistan that didn't exist, under conditions that violated every safety parameter in the book. The pilot who'd taken ground fire from 3 directions, lost hydraulics and half her instruments, and still brought every man home. The pilot whose existence had been erased because the mission never happened. The pilot everyone assumed was dead. He'd signed the death certificate himself, a bureaucratic fiction designed to protect an asset too valuable and too compromised to remain in the official record. Keller had been told she'd been relocated, given a new identity, pensioned out with enough money to disappear forever. He'd never asked where, never wanted to know. Plausible deniability was its own kind of weapon. "You're supposed to be in New Zealand," he said quietly, then immediately regretted it. Admitting he knew anything was already a security breach. Her laugh was soft, almost gentle. "Montana, actually. They got the hemisphere wrong on my file." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with those storm cloud eyes. "Nice cattle country, very quiet, lots of sky." Keller became aware that several people were watching their conversation now, the kind of attention that came from seeing an admiral go suddenly still in the middle of a social event. He forced himself to relax, to lean back, to make it look casual. "Montana suits you," he managed, though his throat felt tight. "Big sky country. Biggest sky in the continental U.S., she agreed. 300 days of visibility a year, perfect for someone who spent 10 years flying NOE through mountains in the dark. NOE, nap of the earth. Flying so low your rotor wash kicked up dust, navigating by instinct and nerve when instruments became suggestions." Keller had flown with Night Stalkers enough to know what that required. The kind of pilot who could thread a helicopter through terrain that would kill anyone else wasn't born. They were forged in repetitions that would break most people before they ever pinned on wings. "Why are you here?" Keller asked, abandoning pretense. Around them, conversations continued, but their table had become a bubble of intensity that people instinctively avoided. She glanced toward the stage where his speech had been delivered, then back to him. "Captain Rodriguez invited me, said it was time I stopped hiding, said people needed to remember that some of us are still standing." Rodriguez, team leader from DEVGRU, one of the men she'd extracted that night. Keller hadn't known they'd stayed in contact, but it made sense. The bonds forged under fire didn't respect official erasure. "People think you're dead," Keller said, and it came out more like an accusation than he'd intended. "You made sure of that." "I made sure you were safe," he countered, heat entering his voice for the first time. "Do you have any idea what would have happened if certain people knew you survived? The questions it would have raised, the operations it would have compromised?" She nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of it. "I know. I read the after-action reports. Well, the ones that existed for about 6 hours before they were deleted." Her eyes hardened slightly. "I also know that 3 Night Stalker pilots refused that mission. I know that when I volunteered, the briefing officer asked me 3 times if I understood I was flying into a zero-probability survival scenario." Keller remembered that briefing. Remembered the uncomfortable silence when the senior pilots, men with thousands of combat hours, had looked at the mission parameters and simply shaken their heads. "Not worth it," one had said. "We'd be flying coffins into a meat grinder for a team that's probably already dead." Then she'd stepped forward, a warrant officer with half their flight hours but twice their nerve, and said 5 words that had changed everything. "I can thread that needle." And she had. Through a mountain pass that Pakistani radar couldn't penetrate because it was too narrow. At night, with a moon that gave just enough light to be dangerous. She'd flown a Black Hawk that shouldn't have fit through spaces that shouldn't have been navigable. She'd held hover in a rotor wash that wanted to slam her into rock walls while SEALs fast-stroked down with a high-value target. She'd taken RPG fire that blew out her tail rotor hydraulics, and she'd still clawed enough altitude to clear the ridgeline before auto-rotating into a crash landing that everyone walked away from. The SEALs had hiked 15 miles to an alternate extraction point. She'd stayed with the wreckage, destroying crypto and sensitive equipment, then melted into the tribal areas for 3 days before a CIA asset smuggled her across the border into Afghanistan. The mission never happened. The HVT never existed. Keller looked at her now, really looked, and saw the cost written in scars that probably covered more than the visible slice along her jawline. Saw it in the way she held herself, coiled and ready, unable to ever fully relax. Saw it in eyes that scanned exits and evaluated threats without conscious thought. "Shadow Ghost," he said again, this time with something approaching reverence. "They said you flew like physics was optional." "Physics is never optional," she corrected gently. "But most people don't know where the actual limits are. They think the book maximums are limits. They're not. They're suggestions based on acceptable risk for average pilots in average situations." She paused. "I was never average and that situation was never acceptable." It was said without arrogance, just flat statement of fact. Keller had served with enough warriors to recognize the difference. Ego got people killed. Accurate self-assessment kept them alive. "What's your real name?" he asked, then immediately held up a hand. "Sorry, forget I asked." But she smiled, a real smile this time that transformed her face from merely attractive to genuinely beautiful. "Emma Vale. Technically I'm still Emma Vale since that's the name on my Montana driver's license and property deed. Shadow Ghost is who I was. Emma is who I'm trying to be. Emma Vale." The name fit somehow, solid and unpretentious. American as cornfields and county fairs, which was probably exactly the point of the cover identity. "Emma," Keller repeated, testing it. "Captain Rodriguez thinks Emma Vale should stop being a ghost and start being visible again." "Rodriguez thinks the next generation of pilots needs to know what's possible," Emma said carefully. "He thinks the stories matter, even the ones that never officially happened, especially those." Keller understood the argument. In special operations, mythology was currency. The stories of impossible missions accomplished became the foundation that new operators built their courage upon. If you erased every difficult victory, you erased the proof that difficult victories were achievable. But there were other considerations, strategic ones that Emma Vale with her Montana ranch and her buried past couldn't fully appreciate. "There are people in Islamabad and Quetta who would still very much like to find you," Keller said quietly. "People who took the destruction of that helicopter as confirmation that you died. People who have moved on to other concerns because they think justice was served when you burned with your bird." Emma's expression didn't change, but Keller saw her hand move unconsciously toward her side, where a concealed carry weapon almost certainly rested. "Old habits from a new life." "I'm aware," she said. "I'm also aware that I can't live in fear forever. At some point, being dead becomes its own kind of prison." Before Keller could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew both their attention with the same instant alertness. A young lieutenant was speaking urgently to one of Keller's aides, gesturing toward the Admiral. The aide's face had gone pale, and he was already moving through the crowd with purpose that suggested something had gone very wrong very quickly. "Admiral," the aide said when he reached their table, slightly breathless. "We have a situation. You're needed in the communications room immediately. It's classified flash level, flash. The highest priority designation reserved for information requiring immediate action to prevent loss of life or critical mission failure." Keller rose automatically, his mind already shifting into crisis mode. "What's the nature?" "Aviation incident, sir. Special operations." "The details are beyond my clearance, but they specifically requested you by name." The aide's eyes flicked to Emma, then away, professional training overriding curiosity. "They also asked if there were any Army aviation personnel present, specifically rated on the MH-60. Emma was already standing, her body language transformed from relaxed civilian to coiled operator in the space of a heartbeat. "I'm rated on every variant of the 60 that exists and a few that don't," she said, her voice carrying the flat authority of someone stating credentials that wouldn't be questioned. Keller made a decision that he'd probably have to justify later. "She's with me," he told the aide, and started walking before anyone could object. Emma fell into step beside him, matching his pace effortlessly. They moved through the ballroom like a pocket of silence in the noise, people instinctively clearing a path. The communications room was 3 floors down, past security stations that verified their credentials with increasingly sophisticated biometrics. When they finally entered, the atmosphere was thick with tension. A bank of screens displayed satellite imagery and real-time video feeds. A colonel that Keller recognized from JSOC stood at the main display, his face grim. "Admiral on deck," someone called, but Keller waved it off impatiently. "Talk to me, Colonel Freeman. What happened?" Freeman gestured to the main screen, where a grainy thermal image showed a helicopter, definitely a Black Hawk variant, hovering in what appeared to be an urban environment. The timestamp indicated the footage was less than 30 minutes old. "DEVGRU team hit a target in Yemen, high-value ISIS logistics coordinator. Intel was solid, execution was flawless, they got the package. But the extraction went sideways. Their primary bird took an RPG to the tail section during infill. Made it to the LZ, but it's flyable only in the theoretical sense." Freeman pulled up another image, this one showing damage assessment. The tail rotor was essentially gone, the boom twisted, hydraulic lines visibly severed even in the low-resolution image. "The backup bird is 40 minutes out, but we have credible intelligence that enemy QRF is converging on the location. They've got maybe 20 minutes before they're overrun. The team is 12 operators plus aircrew from the damaged bird. Too many for one helicopter to safely extract in a single lift." Keller studied the imagery, his mind running through possibilities and finding them all inadequate. "Can't they fight their way to an alternate LZ?" "Negative, sir. They're in the middle of a hostile urban area. Every route is compromised. And the damaged bird has crypto and sensitive equipment that can't be left behind. They'd have to stay to destroy it, which puts them in the LZ until backup arrives, which they won't survive." The room fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the quiet chatter of radio traffic. Keller could hear someone in Arabic, angry and urgent, probably enemy communications intercept. Emma had moved to the tactical display, her eyes scanning the terrain map with the intensity of someone processing multiple variables simultaneously. Her fingers traced routes, calculated distances, evaluated options that Keller knew from experience wouldn't work. "What's the loadout on the backup bird?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Freeman looked at her with confusion that quickly shifted to irritation. "Ma'am, this is a classified briefing." "I'm going to have to ask you to." "She's Shadow Ghost," Keller interrupted, and watched Freeman's face go through the same transformation his own had. Shock, disbelief, then rapid recalculation. "Shadow Ghost is KIA," Freeman said slowly. "Was officially listed as KIA," Keller corrected. "Turns out reports of her death were greatly exaggerated. Now answer her question." Freeman swallowed whatever regulations he was about to cite. "Backup bird is MH-60M, full fuel, standard combat load. 4-man crew, room for maybe 8 passengers max in current configuration. So 14 operators and aircrew, 8 available seats and 20 minutes before everyone dies," Emma summarized clinically. "What's the ceiling and visibility at the LZ?" "Ceiling is unlimited, visibility 2 miles, scattered clouds at 5,000. "Why?" Emma turned to face Keller directly, and he saw in her eyes the same calculation he'd read about in the reports from Pakistan. She was running scenarios that existed outside normal parameters, finding solutions in spaces that regulations said didn't exist. "Because there's a way to do this," she said quietly. "It's not pretty, and it definitely violates about 40 safety protocols, but it's survivable if everyone does exactly what they're told and no one panics." Keller felt his pulse quicken. He knew he should ask what she meant, should demand a full briefing, should follow proper chain of command and planning procedures. Instead, he heard himself say, "Show me." Emma pointed to the satellite imagery. "The damaged bird can hover, right? Just can't translate or maintain altitude with any reliability." Freeman nodded, still processing that he was having this conversation. "That's affirmative." Pilot reported he can hold hover for maybe 90 seconds before control degrades. "That's enough," Emma said, and Keller heard the absolute certainty in her voice. "The backup bird comes in high, maybe 200 feet AGL. Damaged bird gets everyone loaded, gets light on fuel by transferring to the backup if possible, then lifts to maximum controllable altitude, which based on that damage will be maybe 50, 60 feet. Backup bird drops to wave-off altitude above the damaged bird, close enough that rotor wash from the top bird helps stabilize the bottom bird. They fly in formation, the bottom bird using the top bird's downwash to supplement its compromised lift, all the way to the coast where they can set down safely. The room was silent. Freeman stared at her like she'd suggested they fly to the moon. Someone's coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. "That's insane," Freeman said finally. "The rotor-wash interaction alone would create unpredictable aerodynamic forces that could tumble both birds. You're talking about flying two Black Hawks in tandem, one damaged through hostile airspace at night with enemy fire probable." "Yes," Emma agreed. "It's insane. It's also survivable, which is more than any other option on the table right now. I've flown in worse wash. So has every Night Stalker pilot in inventory. The physics work if you're willing to exist in the margins." Keller looked at the clock. 18 minutes until estimated enemy arrival. Freeman was already shaking his head, reaching for the radio to relay orders that would follow doctrine and probably result in dead operators. And Emma was standing there with storm-cloud eyes, and a solution that existed outside the rule book but inside the realm of possible. He'd built a career on making impossible decisions with incomplete information. This was just one more. "Get me the backup bird's pilot on secure comms," Keller ordered. "Now." Freeman hesitated for just a moment, then moved. 90 seconds later, a voice crackled through the speakers, professional and controlled despite the circumstances. "This is Night 26, Colonel Melissa Torres commanding. Go ahead, sir." "Colonel Torres, this is Admiral Keller. I have a proposed extraction plan. It's unconventional. I need to know if you're capable of executing it." There was no hesitation in Torres' response. "Sir, I'm capable of executing any plan that gets my people home." Keller gestured to Emma. Emma leaned toward the microphone, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd lived through what she was describing. "Night 26, this is Shadow Ghost. I'm going to outline a tandem lift procedure. Your damaged sister bird will lift to maximum controllable altitude with all personnel and sensitive equipment aboard. You'll approach from above and position directly overhead at approximately 150 feet separation. Your rotor wash will provide supplementary lift to the damaged aircraft's compromised system. You'll maintain formation flying to the coast, approximately 12 miles, where both aircraft can set down safely." The silence on the radio stretched long enough that Keller wondered if they'd lost the connection. When Torres spoke again, her voice was different, touched with something that might have been awe. "Shadow Ghost, the actual Shadow Ghost, from the Pakistan extraction that never happened." "The same," Emma confirmed. "And I'm telling you this procedure works because I've done it before. Different circumstances, same physics. The key is maintaining perfect altitude separation and accepting that both pilots will be flying at the edge of control authority for the entire transit. It's terrifying, but it works." Another pause then. "Ma'am, can you walk me through the approach and positioning? Because my training says what you're describing should result in catastrophic rotor interference." Emma smiled, and Keller saw the predator behind the civilian facade. "Your training is based on maintaining safe separation. We're going to deliberately violate safe separation in a controlled manner. The trick is understanding that rotor wash isn't just turbulence. It's force that can be used if you're willing to ride it like a wave instead of avoiding it like a wall." For the next 8 minutes, Keller watched Emma brief a mission with the precision of someone who'd taught this before, probably in classified training that didn't officially exist. She walked Torres through entry angles and altitude brackets, through power settings and control inputs, through the psychological preparation required to deliberately fly into conditions that every instinct said were lethal. Freeman had stopped objecting and started taking notes. The other officers in the room had moved closer, drawn by the competence radiating from this woman who wasn't supposed to exist. "You're going to feel the turbulence when you first enter position," Emma was saying, her voice carrying the rhythm of someone describing familiar terrain. "It's going to want to throw you. Don't fight it. You can't muscle through rotor wash. You have to become part of it, anticipate the oscillations, stay ahead of the energy transfer. Think of it like surfing. You're not controlling the wave, you're riding it to where you need to go." "Copy that," Torres said, and Keller heard the shift in her tone from skeptical to committed. What about the damaged bird? What do they need to do? Hold steady altitude and heading, Emma replied. Their job is to be the foundation. They're going to feel your wash helping them, giving them lift they shouldn't have. It's going to feel wrong, like they're being pushed around. They need to trust it, work with it. The moment they try to fight the supplementary lift is the moment this falls apart. Understood. Time to contact with enemy QRF is now 14 minutes. I'm beginning my approach now. Ghost 17, do you copy? The damaged bird's pilot came on the line, his voice tight with stress but controlled. 17 copies. We're loaded and preparing to lift. Ma'am, whoever you are, I hope you know what you're talking about. She does, Keller interjected. Ghost 17, Admiral Keller. The operator briefing you has successfully executed this maneuver under combat conditions. Follow her instructions exactly. No improvisation, no second guessing. Yes, sir. The main screen switched to helmet cam footage from Tor's bird, showing the approach to the LZ through green-tinted night vision. The urban landscape scrolled beneath them, a maze of buildings and streets that looked like every other Middle Eastern city Keller had ever operated in. Thermal signatures bloomed and faded. Civilians, probably, though distinguishing friend from foe at this altitude was impossible. Ghost 17 is lifting now, came the call. Climbing through 20 feet, handling is marginal. I have severe vibration and limited yaw authority. That's expected, Emma said calmly. Get to 50 feet and hold there. Don't try to climb any higher. You're flying on borrowed physics right now. Keller watched the altitude readout from the damaged bird creep upward, 30 feet, 40, 45. The vibration was visible even through the digital feed, the entire airframe shuddering in a way that made everyone in the room wince. 50 feet and holding, the damaged bird's pilot reported, and Keller heard the strain in his voice. This is as good as it's going to get. I've got maybe 2 minutes before control degrades further. Night 26 is entering overhead position now, Torres called. Reducing altitude 200 feet, 175, 150. The helmet cam showed the damaged Black Hawk below, its silhouette stark against the urban background. Even in night vision, the twisted tail section was evident, hanging at an angle that shouldn't allow flight. Rotor wash contact, Torres reported, her voice tight. Experiencing turbulence. Compensating. Emma leaned closer to the microphone. Don't compensate, absorb. Let the aircraft tell you where the stable air is. The feed showed the Black Hawk shuddering, the nose pitching up and down in oscillations that would have terrified anyone who didn't understand the forces at work. But Torres held position, her hands making continuous tiny corrections that kept the helicopter centered over its damaged sister ship. Ghost 17, I'm in position, Torres called. Can you feel the additional lift? Affirmative, came the response, and Keller heard the surprise in the pilot's voice. Vibration is decreasing. I have better control authority. This is actually working. Beginning transit to coast, Torres announced. Ground speed will be 40 knots. Ghost 17, maintain your current altitude and heading. I'll match your movements. We're doing this together. The room watched in silence as both helicopters began moving across the screen, their blips traveling in perfect tandem toward the coast 12 miles away. Keller found himself holding his breath, watching the altitude readouts like a man monitoring life support systems. One fluctuation, one moment of lost concentration, and both birds would tumble from the sky. Contact right, someone called out, and new thermal signatures appeared on the tactical display. Vehicles moving fast toward the LZ, the enemy QRF arriving exactly when intelligence had predicted. Too late to catch the SEALs, but close enough to make everyone nervous. They're shooting, Ghost 17 reported, his voice remarkably calm given the circumstances. I have tracers passing beneath us. They're aiming at where we were, not where we are. Maintain heading and altitude, Emma commanded, her voice cutting through the rising tension. Do not take evasive action. Any deviation from current flight path breaks the wash pattern and we fall. Better to take a few hits than guarantee a crash. It went against every instinct, Keller knew. Pilots were trained to evade fire, to jink and weave, to use their aircraft's agility as defense. What Emma was demanding was that they become stationary targets, trusting armor and luck instead of maneuver. But the alternative was physics, and physics didn't negotiate. The helicopters continued their steady transit, tracers arcing up from below in graceful parabolas that looked almost beautiful on night vision. None of them connected. At 40 knots and 300 feet combined altitude, the shooters were firing at engine noise and hope, their aim degraded by darkness and desperation. 5 miles to coast, Torres reported. Controls are stable. 1-7, how are you holding up? Flying on prayers and rage, came the response, and Keller heard the grim humor that kept warriors sane. But we're flying. That's more than I expected 10 minutes ago. The tactical display showed the coastline approaching, the stark line where land met water. Beyond it, the Arabian Sea stretched dark and empty, a sanctuary where damaged helicopters could land without worrying about enemy reinforcements. 3 miles, Torres called. Beginning gradual descent. 1-7, follow me down. Nice and easy. The altitude readouts began dropping, 200 feet, 175, 150. The formation held, both pilots working in synchronization that spoke to years of training and natural talent. Keller realized he'd been watching something that would never be officially acknowledged, an innovation born of desperation that would probably be classified and buried just like Emma's entire existence had been. At 100 feet, Torres broke formation, climbing away to give the damaged bird room to land. Ghost 17 settled toward the beach like a wounded animal finally able to rest, touching down with a shudder that collapsed the damaged landing gear but kept everyone safe. Ghost 17 is down, the pilot reported, and Keller heard exhaustion and relief in equal measure. All personnel are secure, thanks to whoever came up with that insanity. Night 26 landing adjacent to recover personnel, Torres said, and her bird set down smoothly 50 yards away. Through the helmet cam feed, they watched SEALs spilling out of the damaged aircraft, moving with purpose to transfer sensitive equipment to the functional bird. Mission successful, Freeman said quietly beside Keller, and there was something like wonder in his voice. Against all odds and every regulation, mission successful. Keller turned to Emma, who was stepping back from the communications console, her body language relaxing now that the crisis had passed. The room was staring at her with expressions ranging from disbelief to respect, the same trajectory Keller's own reactions had followed. That was remarkable, he said, and the words felt inadequate. That was Tuesday, Emma replied with a slight smile. Well, it used to be Tuesday. Now it's apparently going to be the story everyone tells at the next reunion. She had a point. Within hours, every special operations aviator in the community would hear about the tandem formation extraction. They'd study it, debate it, eventually work it into training scenarios as an emergency procedure for desperate situations. And at the center of all those conversations would be a ghost who'd come back to life at exactly the right moment. You know what this means, Keller said quietly, drawing her aside from the others. You can't disappear again. Word will get out that Shadow Ghost is alive and operational. People will ask questions. Emma nodded slowly, and Keller saw her processing the implications. The quiet life in Montana, the anonymity she'd built, the safety she'd purchased with her official death, all of it was compromised now. She'd saved lives tonight, but the cost was the peace she'd spent 5 years constructing. I know, she said finally. But Rodriguez was right. The stories matter. The next generation of pilots needs to know what's possible. And maybe, she paused, choosing words carefully, maybe I need to stop pretending I'm someone I'm not. I'm not a rancher, I'm a pilot. That doesn't stop just because the uniform comes off. Keller understood. He'd seen operators try to leave the life behind, try to build normal civilian existences, and watched most of them fail. The skills that made you exceptional in combat didn't translate to ordinary life. Warriors needed war, needed purpose, needed to matter. What happens now? He asked. I go back to Montana, Emma said. Sell the ranch, pack up what little I own, and figure out where I fit in a world that thinks I've been dead for 5 years. She glanced at the communications console where Torres was reporting successful recovery of all personnel and equipment. But first, I think I need to meet Colonel Torres. She executed that maneuver perfectly. That's not just skill, that's courage. She trusted me completely on nothing but my word. She trusted Shadow Ghost, Keller corrected. The legend, the call sign. Emma's expression shifted, something vulnerable showing through the warrior facade. That's the problem, isn't it? Shadow Ghost is the legend, the impossible missions, the skills that don't exist. Emma Vale is just a woman who can't sleep through the night and checks every room for exits. I don't know how to be both. Keller considered that, drawing on 40 years of balancing his own private self against his public persona. You don't have to be both, he said. Shadow Ghost isn't separate from Emma Vale, it's just the part of you that shows up when impossible problems need solutions. The rest of the time you get to be whoever you want. That's simple, she asked, skepticism clear. That's simple, he confirmed. Though probably not that easy, she laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her. Fair enough, nothing about this life is easy. Freeman approached, tablet in hand, his expression mixing professional courtesy with barely contained curiosity. Ma'am, Admiral, I have preliminary after-action reports. Both crews are requesting information about the operator who devised the extraction plan. Colonel Torres is particularly insistent about speaking with her. Emma and Keller exchanged glances. Another decision point, another moment where the easy answer was to deflect and maintain security. But Keller was tired of easy answers that created more problems than they solved. Tell Colonel Torres that Shadow Ghost will meet with her after debriefing, Keller said. Arrange secure transport. This conversation should happen face to face. Freeman nodded and moved away, already coordinating logistics. Emma watched him go, then turned back to Keller with raised eyebrows. You know this is going to open doors I closed years ago. I know, Keller said. But those doors were never really closed, were they? You've just been standing on the other side, pretending you couldn't hear the knocking. The truth of it settled between them, acknowledged but not comfortable. Emma had spent 5 years running from who she was, and tonight had proven that some things couldn't be outrun. Skill like hers, courage like hers, it had a way of surfacing when needed regardless of what paperwork said. They returned to the reunion together, walking through corridors that felt different now, charged with possibility. The ballroom had thinned out, late-night conversations replacing formal dinner atmosphere. Captain Rodriguez spotted them immediately and crossed the room with purpose. Tell me that was you, he said to Emma without preamble. Tell me Shadow Ghost just pulled off another miracle nobody's going to officially acknowledge. That was me, Emma confirmed. And you're right, nobody's going to officially acknowledge it, but the operators are home safe. That's what matters. Rodriguez's face split into a grin that transformed him from hardened warrior to delighted friend. I knew it. I told them you weren't dead, that the government was just hiding you, but nobody believed me. Wait until the team hears about this. The team can hear about it, Keller interjected, but it stays within the community. No social media, no public statements, nothing that compromises operational security or Emma's safety. Rodriguez sobered immediately, the operator in him understanding the stakes. Of course, sir. We take care of our own. But within the teams, Shadow Ghost is about to become legendary all over again. Emma shook her head, but she was smiling. I'm already legendary. I'm the one who died and came back. Adding one more impossible mission to the list is just redundant. Not redundant, Rodriguez countered. Confirmed. There's a difference between rumors and verified capability. Tonight proved that Shadow Ghost isn't just stories from Pakistan. It's a standard, a benchmark that the rest of us can aim for. It was the kind of compliment that couldn't be deflected or dismissed. Keller saw Emma struggle with it, saw her trying to reconcile the legend with the person, the call sign with the woman who just wanted to disappear into Montana's big sky. The struggle showed on her face, vulnerability mixing with pride in a way that made her seem more human than any briefing report had suggested. The rest of the evening unfolded in conversations that would be forgotten by morning but mattered in the moment. Keller introduced Emma to officers who'd only heard whispers of Shadow Ghost, watched their faces transform from curiosity to respect as they understood who stood before them. Emma handled it with grace that came from years of military bearing, even as Keller sensed the effort it cost her. By midnight, when the reunion was winding down, Emma found Keller near the exit. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For not making me stay buried, for letting me be useful again. She paused, searching for words. I thought I wanted peace, wanted normal life, But tonight reminded me that I'm not built for normal. I'm built for problems that don't have solutions until someone decides to find them anyway. Keller nodded, understanding completely. Where will you go from here? First, to meet Colonel Torres tomorrow. Then probably back to Montana to tie up loose ends. After that, she shrugged. I don't know. Maybe there's a place for an officially dead pilot who can do things that aren't supposed to be possible. Maybe I can train the next generation, teach them to find the edges of the flight envelope and live there comfortably. I can make some calls, Keller offered. There are organizations that could use someone with your skills, quiet organizations that understand operational security. I'd appreciate that, Emma said. But no more fake deaths, okay? I've done that once. It's exhausting. They shook hands, and Keller watched her walk out into the San Diego night, a ghost returned to life with a purpose not yet fully defined. He knew her path wouldn't be easy. The intelligence agencies that had buried her before wouldn't be happy about her resurrection. The enemies who thought her dead might seek revenge. The bureaucracy would resist incorporating someone who existed outside normal channels. But he also knew that Emma Vale, call sign Shadow Ghost, would navigate those obstacles the same way she'd threaded Black Hawks through impossible terrain. With skill, courage, and absolute certainty that impossible was just a word used by people who hadn't tried hard enough. 3 weeks later, Emma stood in the briefing room at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The Night Stalkers. Her people, though most of them had never met her. The room held 30 pilots, every one of them with multiple combat deployments, every one of them considered among the best helicopter pilots in the world, and every one of them watching her with expressions mixing skepticism and curiosity. She'd been introduced simply as a guest instructor with relevant experience, which had earned a few smirks from the younger pilots who probably assumed she was some Pentagon staff officer with rusty skills and inflated self-importance. Emma understood the skepticism. She'd felt it herself as a young warrant officer facing senior instructors who talked about flying but hadn't done it in years. The difference was that she'd been flying 3 weeks ago, and the mission was already part of the community's oral tradition. Details passed pilot to pilot with the embellishment that came from retelling. Colonel Torres sat in the front row, and she wasn't skeptical at all. She'd met Emma the day after the Yemen extraction, had spent 6 hours debriefing every aspect of the tandem formation flight, and had emerged from that session both educated and humbled. Torres knew exactly who stood before them, and her presence lent credibility that names alone couldn't provide. "Good morning," Emma began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd earned the right to stand there. "I'm going to teach you something today that isn't in any manual, that violates multiple safety protocols, and that you'll hopefully never need to use. But when you need it, you'll need it desperately, and there won't be time for experimentation." She clicked to the first slide, showing the silhouette of 2 Black Hawks in vertical tandem formation. This is a tandem rotor wash lift, used for extracting personnel when one aircraft is damaged but flyable and evacuation is time-critical. It was used successfully 3 weeks ago in Yemen, and before that, in operations that remain classified. "I'm here because I've flown it multiple times and survived, which makes me one of maybe 3 people on Earth who can teach it from experience rather than theory." The skepticism in the room shifted slightly, seasoning itself with interest. Pilots were practical people. They cared about what worked, and the Yemen extraction was already legendary. If this instructor had actually flown it, she deserved attention regardless of whether she wore a uniform. Emma spent the next 2 hours walking them through physics that most pilots never considered, through the aerodynamics of rotor interference, and the psychological preparation required to deliberately violate every safety instinct they'd been trained to follow. She showed them helmet cam footage from Yemen, sanitized, but detailed enough to demonstrate technique. She drew diagrams showing power settings and altitude brackets. And she told them about Pakistan, about threading a Black Hawk through a mountain pass that maps said didn't exist, about holding hover while bullets turned her instruments into garbage, about auto-rotating a damaged bird into a crash landing that everyone walked away from. The key, she said, and 30 pilots leaned forward unconsciously, is understanding that the aircraft wants to fly. Your job isn't to force it into the air. Your job is to find where it wants to be and help it get there. Most pilots fight their helicopters, imposing will through controls. The best pilots dance with their helicopters, becoming part of the machine until there's no separation between thought and action. A hand went up, a young captain with the confident bearing of someone who'd never been wrong. Ma'am, with respect, that sounds like mystical nonsense. Flying is physics and mathematics. You can't dance with physics. Emma smiled, recognizing her younger self in the question. You're right, Captain. You absolutely can't dance with physics, but you can understand physics so intimately that you're not calculating responses, you're feeling them. You can know your aircraft so completely that you anticipate what it needs before instruments tell you something's wrong. Call it mystical if you want. I call it being so fundamentally competent that you exist beyond conscious decision-making. She paused, let the words settle. How many hours do you have, Captain? 800 combat, 2,000 total, he replied, and there was pride in the number. It was impressive for his age. Good numbers, Emma acknowledged. Solid foundation. I had about the same when I flew Pakistan. You know what I learned that night? That hours mean nothing compared to the willingness to exist outside your comfort zone. Experience teaches you the rules. Excellence requires knowing when to break them. The room had gone silent in the way that indicated complete attention. Even the skeptics had stopped smirking. This wasn't a staff officer reading from notes. This was a warrior teaching warfare, and everyone in the room recognized the difference. Colonel Torres spoke up from the front row. Ghost, can you talk about the psychological aspect? Because that formation flight was the most terrifying thing I've ever done, and I've taken ground fire in 4 different countries. The fear of collision, the turbulence, maintaining position while knowing one mistake kills everyone. How do you manage that? Emma appreciated the question because it acknowledged the human element that technical briefings often ignored. You manage it by accepting that fear is data, not destiny. Your body will scream that you're about to die. Your instruments will contradict each other. Your instincts will tell you to break formation and save yourself. And you have to process all of that, acknowledge it, then decide that the mission matters more than the fear. She looked around the room, meeting eyes, making sure they understood. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite fear. Every time you fly combat, you're making that decision. This maneuver just makes the decision more obvious, more immediate. The fear doesn't go away. You just get better at functioning through it. Another hand went up, this time a major with graying temples and the weathered look of someone who'd spent a career in cockpits. How do you train for something like this? Because I can't imagine any safety officer approving practice runs. You don't train for it directly, Emma admitted. You train the fundamentals until they're reflexive, precision hover, formation flying at minimum separation, emergency procedures until you can execute them while unconscious. Then, when the situation demands it, you combine those fundamentals into something new. The first time I flew tandem wash, I had about 30 seconds of planning and a lifetime of preparation. That's how most impossible things work. They're just fundamental skills applied in novel ways. The briefing continued through the afternoon, Emma sharing insights that couldn't be found in any manual because they lived in the experience of pilots who'd survived situations that shouldn't have been survivable. She talked about how to read rotor wash like a language, how to anticipate turbulence patterns, how to maintain situational awareness when your entire world was vibrating apart. By the time she finished, the skepticism had completely evaporated, replaced by something approaching reverence. These were pilots who understood how difficult their profession was, who'd spent years mastering skills that most people couldn't begin to comprehend. And they recognized that Emma existed on another level entirely, not because she was naturally gifted, though she probably was, but because she'd been willing to go further into the margins than anyone else dared. During the break, younger pilots clustered around her, asking questions that ranged from technical to personal. How did she maintain currency without officially flying? What did she do in Montana? Was the Pakistan mission really as impossible as rumors suggested? Emma answered what she could, deflected what she couldn't, and found herself enjoying the community she'd been cut off from for 5 years. These were her people. They spoke her language. They understood the addiction to flight, the need to be useful, the warrior's eternal struggle between peace and purpose. Colonel Torres approached as the crowd thinned. "That was incredible," she said. "Half those pilots are going to go home tonight and practice hover drills until they can hold position in their sleep. You've raised the standard just by showing them what's possible." "That was the point," Emma replied. "Rodriguez was right. The next generation needs to know that impossible missions get flown by regular people who simply refuse to accept normal limitations." "Are you regular people, though?" Torres asked with a slight smile. "Because from where I sat 3 weeks ago, you seemed pretty extraordinary." Emma considered the question seriously. "I'm regular in all the ways that matter. I get scared, make mistakes, doubt myself. I'm just not regular in my willingness to keep flying when regular people would quit." "That's not extraordinary, that's just stubborn." They walked together toward the parking area, two pilots bound by an experience that few others would ever understand. The sun was setting over Fort Campbell, painting the sky in colors that made Emma's chest ache with longing. God, she'd missed this. The base, the community, the sense of belonging to something larger than herself. "What's next for you?" Torres asked. "Are you coming back officially, pinning on rank, teaching at the schoolhouse?" "I don't know," Emma admitted. "Admiral Keller is making calls, exploring options. There's talk of a civilian contractor position that would let me train without requiring active duty status. Might be the best of both worlds. I get to fly and teach without being buried under bureaucracy again." Torres nodded understanding. The military was a hungry machine that consumed people in paperwork and regulations. The higher you rose, the less you actually did the job you joined to do. "Well, if you do come back in any capacity, you've got an entire regiment that will support you. Shadow Ghost isn't just a call sign anymore. It's a standard. And we need standards, especially now when mission complexity keeps escalating." They reached Emma's rental car and Torres extended her hand for a shake that turned into a brief embrace. "Thank you," Torres said quietly, "for saving my people, for teaching me something I didn't know was possible, for being what you are." "Thank you for trusting me," Emma replied, "for executing a maneuver that every instinct said was suicidal. That took more courage than I'm usually giving credit for." "I trusted Shadow Ghost," Torres corrected. "The legend." Emma smiled, hearing her own words to Keller echoed back. "Shadow Ghost is just the part of me that shows up when impossible problems need solutions. The rest of the time I'm just Emma, trying to figure out where I fit." She drove away from Fort Campbell as darkness fell, feeling something settle in her chest that might have been peace or might have been purpose. The difference was becoming harder to distinguish. Montana had been an attempt at the former, but tonight she'd found the latter and it felt like coming home. Her phone rang as she crossed into Tennessee. Keller's number. She answered on the car's speaker system. "This is Emma." "Emma, Admiral Keller, I have news. There's an organization that operates in the spaces between official agencies. They handle problems that don't fit normal channels, use assets that don't officially exist. They're interested in having a conversation with you about potential employment." Emma's pulse quickened. "What kind of problems?" "The kind where someone needs to get somewhere impossible or extract from somewhere they shouldn't be or accomplish something that officially can't be done. The kind of problems that require Shadow Ghost, not Emma Vale. And they're okay with my complicated status." "They specialize in complicated," Keller said dryly. "Most of their operators are officially dead, retired, or never existed in the first place. You'd fit right in." Emma processed that, weighing freedom against purpose, peace against calling. The Montana ranch had buyers interested. She had no ties holding her anywhere. And the last 3 weeks had proven that she couldn't stop being who she was just because paperwork said she didn't exist. "Set up the meeting," she said finally. "Let's see what they have to say." "I'll have details within 48 hours, Keller promised. "Emma, for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. Warriors need war, and you're one of the best warriors I've ever seen." Even though I'm not a SEAL, Emma asked, injecting humor into the conversation. Even though, Keller confirmed. Turns out some of the most dangerous people wear wings instead of tridents. Who knew? They said goodbye, and Emma drove through the night with something like hope building in her chest. Shadow Ghost was coming back, not as a legend or a ghost story, but as an operational asset for problems that existed outside normal solutions. The call sign was getting a second life, and this time she wouldn't have to pretend to be dead to keep it. 2 days later, Emma sat in a nondescript office building in McLean, Virginia, across from a man who introduced himself only as Shepard. He was 50s, gray at the temples, with the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen everything and been surprised by nothing. "We've read your file," Shepard said without preamble. "Both of them, the official one that ends with your death and the real one that Admiral Keller provided. Impressive record. The Pakistan extraction alone would be enough to earn our interest." "But," Emma prompted, hearing the unspoken qualifier, "but we need to know if you're willing to operate under the conditions we require. No official backup, no cavalry coming to save you if things go wrong, no public recognition or thanks. You be a ghost in truth, not just in name, going places and doing things that can never be acknowledged." Emma had expected this. Organizations that operated in shadows couldn't afford operators who needed sunlight. "I've been a ghost for 5 years," she pointed out. "Being one officially doesn't seem much different." "It's very different," Shepard countered. "In Montana, you could quit being a ghost anytime you wanted. With us, once you're in, extraction options are limited. We can't burn operational security to recover someone who simply decided they missed normal life." "I understand," Emma said. "What kind of missions are we talking about?" Shepard pulled up a tablet, showed her operational summaries sanitized of details but clear enough in scope. Extractions from denied areas. Supply runs to forces that didn't officially exist. Reconnaissance flights over territories where American aircraft had no permission to fly. Every mission was impossible by conventional standards, which meant every mission needed someone for whom impossible was just a Tuesday. "This one interests me," Shepard said, highlighting an operation scheduled for 2 months out. "Medical evacuation from a research station in Antarctica that's weathered in. The patient is critical. The window for flight is maybe 6 hours during a break in the storm, and conventional wisdom says flying in those conditions is suicide." "Conventional wisdom is usually right," Emma observed. "Flying in Antarctic conditions with limited visibility and hurricane-force winds is suicide." "Usually," Shepard agreed. "But our intelligence suggests the patient has information worth the risk. Information about Chinese military installations that could shift strategic balance in the Pacific. Getting that information requires getting the patient out alive." Emma studied the operational parameters, her mind already calculating approach vectors and power requirements for flying in thin air at extreme cold. "It was possible, maybe, if you were willing to accept risk ratios that would horrify any safety board. You'd need someone crazy enough to try it," she said. "Yes," Shepard agreed. "We'd need Shadow Ghost." And there it was, laid out plainly. They weren't hearing Emma Vale to fly safe missions in controlled environments. They were hearing Shadow Ghost to accomplish things that shouldn't be possible, using skills that existed outside normal parameters. It was a devil's bargain, trading safety and recognition for purpose and possibility. Emma thought about Montana, about quiet mornings and big sky and peace that felt more like death than rest. She thought about the Yemen extraction, about Colonel Tor's voice over the radio trusting her completely, about the satisfaction of solving impossible problems. She thought about Rodriguez's words, "The stories matter." "I'm in," she said simply. "When do I start?" Shepard's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested satisfaction. "You start now. We need to establish your cover identity, set up operational protocols, get you current on equipment you'll be using. The Antarctica mission is your first operational deployment, but there's months of preparation first." "Cover identity?" Emma asked. "I thought I'd be staying dead." "To the world at large, yes. But you'll need an identity that allows you to move through channels where Emma Vale would raise questions. We're thinking international logistics consultant, specializes in extreme environment operations, gives you reason to be in odd places without triggering curiosity. It made sense, Emma supposed. Ghost operations still needed logistics, just hidden under layers of plausible deniability. Over the following weeks, Emma disappeared into a world she hadn't known existed. Shepard's organization, she never learned its actual name, if it even had one, operated from a facility that looked like any other office park but contained training infrastructure that rivaled some military bases. She flew simulators that modeled conditions from Arctic to desert to jungle. She trained on weapons systems that weren't officially in American inventory. She studied evasion techniques and emergency protocols for situations where calling for help wasn't an option. And she met other operators, people like her who'd been extraordinary in conventional service and chosen to become legends in unconventional shadows. There was Nomad, a former Delta operator who specialized in direct action in denied areas. Oracle, a CIA analyst who'd gone operational after proving she could predict enemy movements better than any algorithm. Whisper, a communications specialist who could crack any encryption and talk her way into any facility. All of them using call signs instead of names. All of them officially dead or retired. All of them unable to exist in normal society because they'd been forged for exceptional circumstances. Emma found herself fitting into this community more naturally than she'd fit into Montana's ranching culture. These people understood the addiction to operating at the edge, the dissatisfaction with normalcy after you'd proven you could accomplish the impossible. They spoke the same language, shared the same scars, carried the same weight of missions that could never be discussed at dinner parties. 2 months passed in intense preparation. Emma flew practice runs in Alaska, getting current on cold weather operations. She studied Antarctic weather patterns until she could predict wind shifts by reading satellite imagery. She memorized the research station's layout, identifying every possible LZ within 5 miles. When the mission brief came down, she was as ready as preparation could make her. The briefing was conducted by Shepard himself, in a secure room with no windows and walls that probably blocked every electronic signal known to science. "The patient is Dr. Sarah Chen," he began, and Emma noticed the use of an actual name, unusual in an organization that preferred anonymity. "She's a climate researcher who stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to see. Chinese construction in a sector of Antarctica that's supposed to be neutral territory under international treaty." Shepard pulled up satellite imagery showing a research station that looked normal, except for the adjacent construction that definitely wasn't scientific. "Our analysis suggests this is a military installation disguised as climate research. If confirmed, it violates multiple treaties and gives China operational reach into the Southern Ocean. Dr. Chen has documentation, video evidence, and technical specifications. But she also has acute appendicitis that's progressing toward rupture." "Why not just transmit the data?" Emma asked. "Burn it to encrypted channels and get it out that way." "Because the Chinese know she has it. They've jammed all electronic communications from the station and positioned their own research vessel within helicopter range. If we try electronic transmission, they'll know what we have and where it came from. Dr. Chen would disappear, her evidence would be discredited, and we'd have nothing actionable." "But if we extract her physically," Emma said, following the logic, "we can get her and her evidence to neutral territory before China knows she's gone. They'd have to admit they were monitoring a supposedly civilian station to explain how they knew about the extraction." "Exactly," Shepard confirmed. "The weather provides cover. Nobody expects helicopter operations in Antarctic winter storms. You fly in during a brief window, extract Chen, and get her to the research vessel we have positioned in international waters. The entire operation happens before anyone realizes it's occurring." Emma studied the weather projections, the flight paths, the contingency plans. It was possible technically, but the margins were non-existent. One miscalculation, one unexpected wind shear, one equipment failure, and she'd be painting the Antarctic ice red. "I'll need full control over execution," she said. No armchair quarterbacking from analysts watching satellite feeds. If conditions on-site don't match the brief, I need authority to abort or modify. Agreed, Shepard said immediately. This is your operation, Shadow Ghost. We'll provide intelligence and support, but tactical decisions are yours. Emma nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders. Lives depending on her judgment, mission success balanced on her skills, no backup plan beyond succeeding the first time. It was terrifying. It was exactly what she'd been born to do. The flight south began 3 days later from Christchurch, New Zealand. Emma piloted a civilian-marked helicopter, ostensibly a support aircraft for the research vessel, but equipped with military-grade avionics and cold-weather modifications that would make any mechanic suspicious. Her co-pilot was Nomad, the Delta operator, because Shepard insisted on two-person crews for operations this risky. Emma had objected initially, preferring to fly solo, but Nomad proved competent enough that she relaxed slightly. He understood that she was in command, didn't try to second-guess her decisions, and had the calm competence of someone who'd operated in conditions where death was probable rather than possible. They staged from the research vessel for 2 days, waiting for the weather window that meteorologists promised was coming. Emma spent the time studying ice charts and wind patterns, running through emergency procedures until they were reflexive, preparing mentally for flying in conditions that would be considered insane anywhere else on Earth. The window opened at 300 local time, a brief period where winds would drop to merely dangerous rather than suicidal. Emma pre-flight checked the helicopter with obsessive thoroughness, knowing that equipment failure in Antarctica wasn't an inconvenience, it was a death sentence. Every system had to be perfect because there were no alternates, no emergency services, no rescue teams standing by. At 3:30, they lifted off from the vessel's landing pad, climbing into darkness that felt absolute. The helicopter's navigation system showed their route, 200 nautical miles to the research station, flying low to avoid Chinese radar. Emma kept them at 50 feet above the ice, using terrain masking and the radar-absorbing paint job to remain invisible. The Antarctic winter night was unlike anything she'd flown in before. The darkness felt thick, oppressive, broken only by their instruments and the occasional glimpse of ice reflecting starlight. Temperature outside was -40°C, cold enough that exposed skin would freeze in minutes, cold enough that metal became brittle and fluids congealed. The helicopter shuddered constantly in winds that varied from 20 to 40 knots, gusting higher in moments that required Emma's full concentration to maintain heading. Nomad monitored systems silently, calling out status updates without adding unnecessary chatter. He understood that Emma was flying at the edge of controllability, that her entire focus was channeling through the controls into the aircraft. An hour into the flight, they encountered the storm wall. Emma had known it was coming. The meteorologists had been clear that the weather window existed inside a larger storm system, a temporary eye where conditions marginally improved. But knowing intellectually and experiencing physically were different things. The helicopter bucked like a living creature as they entered the turbulence, ice forming instantly on the windscreen despite heating elements running at full power. Visibility dropped to 0, forcing Emma to fly entirely on instruments, trusting altitude readouts and heading indicators while her body screamed that they were tumbling, falling, dying. "Controls are responsive," she said aloud, partly for Nomad's benefit but mostly to remind herself. "We're straight and level. Instruments are reliable, we're fine." "We are absolutely not fine," Nomad replied with gallows humor. "But we're flying, which is better than most alternatives." The turbulence continued for 20 minutes that felt like hours. Emma flew with minute control inputs, constantly adjusting for wind shear and ice accumulation. The helicopter wanted to roll right, then left, then nose up in ways that would stall them if she wasn't anticipating every movement. This was flying at the cellular level, where you became the machine and the machine became you, where thought and action merged until there was no separation. When they finally broke through into the relatively calmer air of the weather window, Emma's hands were cramping from grip pressure, and her shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold. But they were still flying, still on course, still mission capable. Research station is 30 miles ahead, Nomad reported, checking GPS. Chinese vessel is holding position 12 miles offshore. No indication they've detected us. They won't, Emma said with certainty. Nobody in their right mind is looking for helicopter traffic in these conditions. The research station appeared on thermal imaging, a cluster of buildings radiating heat against the frozen landscape. Emma approached from the south, using terrain features to mask her approach, keeping the helicopter low enough that rotor wash kicked up snow in blinding clouds. She'd planned the approach to put buildings between her bird and the Chinese vessel's position, minimizing the chance of visual or radar detection. The landing was textbook, touching down with barely a shudder in winds that were trying to flip them sideways. Dr. Chen emerged from the main building immediately, a small figure in extreme cold weather gear, clutching a backpack that presumably contained evidence worth risking Emma's life. Nomad jumped out, helped Chen aboard, strapped her into the cargo compartment with practiced efficiency. 90 seconds on the ground, then Emma was lifting off again, fighting winds that felt stronger than before. The return flight was worse than the approach. The weather window was closing, winds increasing as the storm reasserted itself. Ice accumulated faster than heating elements could shed it, adding weight and degrading aerodynamics. Emma found herself making constant power adjustments, burning fuel at rates that left no margin for deviation. 50 miles from the research vessel, the low fuel warning illuminated. Emma had calculated this, had known they'd be running on fumes, but seeing the light still triggered adrenaline. "We're committed," she told Nomad. "No divert options. We make the ship or we don't." "Then we make the ship," Nomad replied calmly. "Shadow Ghost doesn't miss." Emma appreciated the confidence even as she focused on fuel management and flight path optimization. Every gust of wind that pushed them off course cost fuel to correct. Every altitude change consumed power. They were flying a machine that wanted to empty its tanks and fall from the sky, and Emma's job was to convince it to stay aloft just a little longer. The research vessel appeared on navigation systems at the same moment the engine coughed. Not failing, not yet, but warning that fuel pressure was dropping below optimal. Emma transitioned to a gentle descent, trading altitude for reduced power requirements, stretching the remaining fuel across the final miles. They crossed the vessel's landing pad with the engine running on vapor and prayers. Emma sat down with a final shudder from the airframe, and the engine quit 3 seconds later, turbine winding down in a way that suggested they'd extracted every possible moment of thrust. Nomad was already moving, helping Dr. Chen out of the helicopter and toward the vessel's interior. Emma sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands still on the controls, breathing hard, processing what they'd just survived. They'd flown 200 miles into the Antarctic winter, extracted a high-value target under Chinese surveillance, and made it back with fuel reserves measured in seconds. It was the kind of mission that would never be acknowledged, never be decorated, never be spoken of outside the shadows. Dr. Chen's intelligence proved as valuable as promised. The Chinese installation was confirmed through her evidence, triggering diplomatic responses that shifted power dynamics in the Antarctic treaty system. China was forced to explain construction they denied existed, to dismantle facilities that violated international agreements, to accept monitoring provisions they'd previously rejected. All because one climate researcher had stumbled onto something she shouldn't have seen, and Shadow Ghost had flown a mission that maps said was impossible. Shepard debriefed Emma personally, in the same secure room where the mission had been briefed. "Exceptional work," he said, and the praise was more meaningful coming from someone who never wasted words. "You've proven the concept. There are extractions we can accomplish that conventional forces simply can't." "How do you feel?" Emma considered the question. She felt alive in ways Montana had never achieved, purposeful in ways that civilian life couldn't provide. She also felt exhausted, aware that she'd aged in ways that didn't show on calendars. "I feel useful," she said finally. Like I'm doing what I'm built for. Good, Shepard replied, because we have 7 more missions queued up that require your specific skill set. You've become our go-to asset for operations that exist outside normal parameters. 7 more impossible missions. 7 more opportunities to prove that impossible was just inadequate imagination. Emma felt something settle in her chest, the certainty that she'd found her place. Not in Montana's big sky, but in the spaces between official operations, where legends operated in service of objectives that couldn't be spoken. Over the following year, Shadow Ghost flew missions across 4 continents. She extracted wounded operatives from denied areas of Syria, delivered medical supplies to resistance fighters in Myanmar, conducted reconnaissance flights over North Korean facilities that officially didn't exist. Each mission was impossible by conventional metrics, which meant each mission was exactly what she'd been trained for. Her reputation grew within the Shadow community. Operators who'd heard whispers of Pakistan now had confirmation. Shadow Ghost wasn't legend, she was capability, and working with her meant surviving situations that should have been fatal. She became the pilot everyone requested when missions went from difficult to insane, when conventional wisdom said abort and warrior instinct said there had to be a way. But reputation came with costs. Her face, though not widely circulated, was known to enough intelligence agencies that she couldn't travel openly. The quiet life was permanently gone, replaced by safe houses and aliases, by constant awareness that enemies who thought her dead might recognize her alive. One evening, 18 months after joining Shepard's organization, Emma found herself in a bar in Prague, waiting to meet an asset who claimed to have intelligence on Russian operations in Ukraine. The bar was quiet, locals nursing beers and pretending not to notice the obviously American woman in the corner. She'd ordered vodka to blend in, though she hadn't touched it. Staying sharp was survival. A man entered who made Emma's instincts trigger immediately. Mid-50s fit, with the bearing of someone who'd spent a career in violence. He scanned the bar with professional efficiency, his eyes lingering on Emma for just a moment before moving on. But that moment was enough. He'd recognized her. Emma's hand moved toward the concealed weapon at her hip, muscle memory from 1,000 threat assessments. But the man simply smiled slightly, walked to the bar, ordered his own vodka, and raised it in a subtle toast toward her direction. He was Russian, Emma guessed from his features and bearing, probably military intelligence, GRU or something similar. And he'd recognized Shadow Ghost in a Prague bar, which meant her operational security was more compromised than she'd thought. The man finished his drink, left payment on the bar, and walked out without approaching her. A message Emma understood. I know who you are. I could act on that knowledge. I'm choosing not to, for now. She aborted the meeting with her asset, followed protocols for blown operations, and reported to Shepard that her cover might be compromised. His response was pragmatic. We knew this would eventually happen. Ghosts can only remain invisible for so long. The question is whether you want to stay operational or retire while you still can. Emma thought about retirement, about finally finding the peace that Montana had promised but never delivered. She thought about quiet mornings and safe beds, about living without constantly checking exits and evaluating threats. Then she thought about the operators who depended on her, about missions that wouldn't succeed without her skills, about the reality that she'd been built for war and couldn't unbuild herself just because danger increased. I stay operational, she said, but I want better security, tighter protocols. If intelligence agencies know I exist, I need to be harder to find. Agreed, Shepard said. We'll relocate you between missions, vary your patterns, increase compartmentalization. You'll become a ghost even to other ghosts. And she did. Emma's life became a series of safe houses and aliases, of missions flown and disappeared into, of impossible problems solved and never discussed. 3 years after joining Shepard's organization, Emma found herself back at Fort Campbell for an unscheduled visit. Colonel Torres, now a full bird colonel and commanding the 160th Assault Helicopter Battalion, had requested her presence for reasons that weren't explained over secure communications. Emma arrived in civilian clothes, using credentials that identified her as a logistics consultant. Technically true, if you stretched the definition of logistics to include getting people out of places they shouldn't be. Torres met her at the security gate personally, which suggested this wasn't a casual social call. They drove to the battalion headquarters in silence, Torres' expression suggesting she was working through how to phrase something difficult. Inside her office, Torres closed the door and activated a white noise generator that would defeat any surveillance. "I've been asked to approach you about something that exists outside normal channels," Torres began carefully. "An operation that's been authorized at the highest levels but can't be executed through conventional special operations." Emma settled into a chair, recognizing the preamble. This was how shadow missions began, with careful language and plausible deniability, with requests that couldn't be refused because refusing meant abandoning people who'd counted on you. "Go ahead," she said simply. Torres pulled up a map showing terrain in the Horn of Africa. "We have a team compromised in Somalia. They went in to capture a terrorist facilitator, accomplished the mission, but their extraction was interdicted. They're holed up in a compound with no good options. Enemy forces are converging. We have maybe 6 hours before they're overrun." Emma studied the map, already seeing the problem. Somalia was denied airspace for American military operations, politically sensitive in ways that made official rescue impossible. But unofficially, warriors didn't get abandoned just because diplomacy was complicated. "Why not just send in a SEAL team?" Emma asked. "Extract through overwhelming force." "Because that would be an act of war," Torres said bluntly. "It would violate sovereignty agreements, trigger diplomatic incidents, potentially destabilize the entire region. Officially, America isn't conducting military operations in Somalia. An overt rescue would expose that we are, which has implications beyond one team. But unofficially, through assets that don't exist, extraction might be possible," Emma concluded, "without triggering the same diplomatic fallout." "Exactly," Torres confirmed. "The team is 12 operators plus 2 local assets who'd be killed if left behind. The compound has a courtyard large enough for helicopter landing. Enemy forces won't arrive for 5 to 6 hours based on their movement patterns." Emma examined the operational parameters, running calculations that had become instinctive over years of impossible extractions. The distance from neutral airspace to the compound was within range of modified helicopters. The timing was tight but manageable. The risk was acceptable if you defined acceptable as probable survival rather than guaranteed. "I can do it," she said. "But I'll need crew I can trust and equipment that isn't tracked to American inventory. Can't have this traced back to official channels." "Already arranged," Torres said, and Emma heard relief in her voice. "We have a helicopter that officially belongs to a private security contractor. Your co-pilot will be someone familiar with the region and cleared for compartmented operations. You'll stage from Djibouti under commercial cover, conduct the extraction, return to neutral territory. Total flight time about 4 hours. "What's the threat environment?" Emma asked.